operate newspapers in Darwin, in Alice Springs, in Cairns, in Townsville, in the Gold Coast, in Brisbane, in Sydney, in Geelong, in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Perth and in Hobart. And we also operate community newspapers in many outlying regions from those primary metropolitan centres. The cities that I recited are where we have paid media. We are committed to being a local voice in all of those places, and we have a very spirited relationship with the community in each one of them.
And so when the Finkelstein report outlines that adequacy of news services in regional areas is of concern and it urgently needs to be addressed in the immediate future, do you think the government's response to that report and the convergence report is adequately dealt with within the legislation before us in terms of those regional issues?
Well, the irony of the government adopting a what might be described as an armoured approach to diversity of media, and at the same time advocating removal of the 75% reach tool on broadcast licences is not lost on me. So on the one hand, the government is saying that it is absolutely in favour of diversity, and on the other hand, the government is saying, but not when it comes to broadcast television. Go figure.
I think we're all going and figuring. Just in terms of the issue Mr. Reid was talking about, a 30-year-ago scenario being played out, and I go to I go to Part K in Section 7, where the body corporate can go to where the funding arrangements are sustainable for the body corporate. Would you suggest, as businessmen, that having forward funding for 4 years guaranteed, whether you're in or out, is a sustainable business model?
Well, it's a pretty tough discipline on us. I mean, we have no guarantee in a forward sense of our revenues, but our obligation to the Press Council is absolute.
Thank you. So
not even the Parliament has a 4-year guarantee. I think the forward estimates go 3 years into the future, don't they?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Williams, last week in a speech you claimed that these reforms turn a deliberate blind eye to the fact that all Australians have access to more diversity in news, opinion and commentary than at any time in history. How do you reconcile this claim when we know in history, if we go back to the 50s, I raised this with Mr. Highwood earlier, that we had 15 national and metro papers with 10 owners, and today we have 11 papers with 3 owners, one of those, of course, being News Limited, which is incredibly influential. Now, if you think that bloggers and various other commentary, as you talk about in the quote that I've just taken from you in your speech, represent diversity, where are they getting their information from, those bloggers? They're getting it from one of the most influential media owners, which is News Limited. And on top of that, you raised this issue of News Limited being in newspapers all across the country, and you listed them. I know in my home state of Tasmania, where the Mercury, as you referred to, is in Hobart, it's had its staffing numbers cut dramatically so. And surely I see that must be the result of setting up subbing hubs and dropping sections from a central point into all News Limited papers around the country, rather than having a stronger diversity of views if you're cutting staffing numbers to be able to tell those stories in those regions. So what do you actually mean by your quote in your speech that there is access to more diversity in news and opinion as one of the only 3 owners now in this country of media?
Well, I'll shortly pass to Mr. Reid, but you cannot deny, Senator, that back in the time that you were invoking in the 50s, that there was a 15-minute news bulletin in the evening on the ABC. It was a 15-minute news bulletin. I actually remember it. There were occasional news bulletins on terrestrial broadcast, and there was a very limited AM set of radio networks that had networked news. Today, there are 14 independent news channels, none of which not one of which is under the control of Foxtel, available on Foxtel. The ABC has ABC News 24. There are substantial news and current affairs operations with each of the broadcasters across the length and breadth of Australia. In terms of internet provision, there are a huge number of services. I would encourage you to examine the number of sites that Australians visit and to look at the top 10, top 20 and top 30 sites that Australians actively use. You'd find the BBC is the fourth most popular news provider in Australia from Australian consumers.
So your answer is talking about everything other than newspapers right now, and everything other than ownership, which are the two points of my question, newspapers and ownership.
Senator, you cannot in one and the same breath speak about convergence and then say, let's just talk about newspapers.
No, but my question went to bloggers, it went to commentary, and where they get that information from.
You asked me as to the basis on which I was saying that Australians have access to more news and information sources than at any time in their history, and I was endeavouring to tell you why and how. If my answer is unsatisfactory, I apologise.
Well, thanks, Mr. Williams. We'll now, thanks for being here this afternoon. We'll now call at 10. Thank you. Thank you. I welcome Network 10. Mr. McLennan, do you have an opening statement?
We've tabled our statement before, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Senator Campbell.
Yeah, that tabling was in another committee, so if I could just get you to table it for this committee, that would be good. Thank you. So we'll go straight to questions. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, Chair, Mr. McLennan and Mr. Bird. Thank you for your time in this inquiry today as well. Can I go firstly to a submission where it touches on the News Media Diversity Bill and the Public Interest Media Advocate Bill, and you indicate Network 10's strong opposition to both of these bills. Can you elaborate on that, Mr. McLennan, and especially whilst obviously there are issues in relation to the public interest test, but also I'm interested in your views as to how those bills reach into the regulation of news media as a sector or as a company that is perhaps less effective than some of those we've heard from today.
Sure. On the television licence fee amendment bill, we welcome any change in the reduction of those on those fees. As you know, we are in a very structurally challenged industry at the moment, and we have to work very hard to address our cost base and to make sure that we are a viable concern. We do oppose the broadcasting legislation, the diversity bill and the public interest media advocate bill. We find them subjective and they'll be hard to manage, and it's that subjectivity that concerns us. But on the whole, as we said this morning, we have significant issues with the 75% reach rule. We believe that will automatically lead to a reduction in terms of the diversity of the media landscape in Australia. We think that the implications as it relates to regional Australia will be far and wide, and we're concerned about the diversity that all Australians will be able to enjoy.
What is the particular subjectivity that concerns you about the operation and decision-making process of the public interest media advocate?
We think the power is concentrated with one person. That person is appointed by the government, and the very subjective nature of that whole issue means that it's open to different interpretation by many constituencies, and we find that that'll be very hard to manage.
And what's the impact that that level of doubt and subjectivity would have on the operation of your company and potential future transactions involving your company?
Well, I think you have to need to look at the legislation as a whole, the whole package. We find that the influence that person will have on our business, again, having that uncertainty, I think, creates a whole lot of doubt in terms of how we operate the business. But again, when we take a step back and look at how all of this legislation is being managed, we need to look at it in its totality. And as I said before, the 75% reach rule is a concern to us.
Okay. So if we try to unpack your concerns just a little bit here, firstly there's the actual appointments process and operation essentially of the public interest media advocate.
Yeah.
You have a concern that that appointments process is very open-ended, that the powers are too great and that there's a lack of appeal mechanism built in. Are they some of the issues that you'll be worried about at that level?
Yeah, that is true, and it's more regulation, which we don't think we need. We think that ACMA represents the television industry well, and what we want is less. I guess we've got an appropriate level of regulation at the moment. We don't need more.
In terms of the public interest test as it is proposed and defined, regardless of necessarily who is administering it, what are your particular concerns about the nature of the proposed public interest test?
Yeah, I think we share a lot of the concerns that others have raised today about how you define what the public interest is, how you define a lessening of diversity, but particularly around what is the public interest. We've listed a set of what we think are major operational concerns as an annexure to our submission. And in there, one of the comments is about this subjectivity of what is the public interest. There's just not enough definition in there to give anyone any real guidance as to what you could take into account in determining what the public interest is or isn't.
Mr Williams and News Limited also argued that there were concerns in relation to the application of the public interest test around the reversal of the onus of proof when it comes to whether diversity is maintained or not. Do you share those concerns?
Yes.
Yes?
Well, it differs from the ACCC process, obviously. It's a very different thing to have to prove positively no lessening of diversity or that something is in the public interest than to prove the opposite. And we can't see a justification for that switch in the onus of proof, and it goes against what the Convergence Review recommended.
Thank you. In terms of other areas of operational concerns about how the public interest test would be determined, you are concerned as well that there's a lack of particular detail as to how the terms are defined. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and again, can you elaborate just a little bit on those particular concerns as to how those details are inadequately defined, and whether you believe there would be means to rectify that, or whether the whole concept is essentially flawed?
We think the whole concept is essentially flawed, but even in trying to apply this, if it were to get through, there are so many different areas where it's unclear how different provisions would operate, and we've listed some of those in that section. Appeal processes is a big concern for us. There are a range of things in there that we're concerned about.
Okay. Ten's ownership has been perhaps a little more fluid than of your two commercial rivals over the years. Does that lead you to have perhaps even more heightened concerns about how these proposals could work and could restrict future commercial investors in terms of the operation of TEN?
Our troubles of late have been well documented. What we want and what we need to operate a successful Channel 10 network is clarity going forward from a legislative point of view and how the market in totality will operate. And our concern all along here has been over the last week or so is we need to understand what that environment looks like. We need to understand what the framework looks like. When you look at the 75% reach rule, there's a very real concern that Southern Cross and Nine will merge. And every clear indicator that we've got is that is a real possibility at the moment. And the implications for regional Australia are great. And so I think what we want is for everyone to take a deep breath, reset the process and understand how that particular aspect of the legislation then works in with everything else.
Okay. Can I go to the changes to content quotas now? Do you support those changes?
Yes.
Yep.
Have these changes been developed in consultation with the free TV sector?
Yes.
They have. So when were the particular nature of these changes in terms of the new content quotas being applied to primary channels and the new content quotas being applied to secondary channels? When were they first floated with the government, with the industry, and when did industry and government largely settle on these figures?
Well, we've been, Channel 10, with Network 10, we've been talking about updating the content rules for I think about 3 or 4 years now. We've had our program, Australian drama program Neighbours, on one of our digital channels since the beginning of 2011. And because that program is on a digital channel and not on the main channel 10, it doesn't attract any drama points. So we've been talking about that for at least 2 or 3 years to say to people, it's first-run Australian drama, it employs about 200 people over the year, it does exactly the job that the drama quota is there to do, and it should get drama points just like Home and Away does. So we've been talking to the government about that for as long, 3 or 4 years. When we got down to, after the Convergence Review reported, we started talking to the government about, what they were going to do, whether they were going to update the quota rules. So I think it was, a discussion that became more focused around the middle of last year and has come to this point today. So it's been an ongoing process.
Okay. Do you have an appreciation of when you think industry and government settled on, yes, we agree and are all happy with these new quota figures?
It was late last year, I think.
Late last year. So several months ago, just a final question if I can share, how does the consultation on these aspects of the reforms compare with the consultation, for example, to the establishment of the public interest media advocate or the new public interest test?
Well, vastly different, although we hadn't seen the amendments to enact any of the content changes until Thursday last week. So we hadn't seen the detail on any of that until Thursday last week.
I've got a few questions to you folk this morning in the other committees, so I'll be fairly brief because we canvass some of these issues there. One thing I'm interested in, one of the issues that was raised, not in the context of Channel 10 necessarily, but in the overall context of digital multi-channels, the fact that there's a larger amount there's the same amount of content effectively, same amount of Australian content over a broader number of channels. I'm interested in, without giving away any commercial secrets, orders of magnitude differences in terms of trade between the main channel and multi-channels when you're buying content from an Australian producer. Are you able to bid down Australian content producers if you're going to park something on the multi-channel, which obviously has a lower audience, smaller audience?
To my knowledge, that has never happened, and we wouldn't do that.
Why? If you're going to, and I'm treading carefully, I don't want to breach confidence here, but if you're going to purchase a particular piece of content for your main channel, larger audience share, larger advertising revenues, you'll pay top dollar for it if it's a good bit of content. If you're going to park it over here, same content, on one of your multi-channels with a much smaller audience share, would there not be pressure on you to pay less for that same piece of content?
Look, it's a competitive market out there in the sense that the independent production companies, of which we deal with a lot of them, certainly we have, relationships with them that, we want to continue to keep very viable and worthwhile for both parties. I think our history has proven right across the 10 network that we haven't done that and we wouldn't do that. I mean, I think philosophically we abide by all the requirements that we're set out to do, and it's just something that to me commercially doesn't make sense.
Okay, it seems to make commercial sense to me, but are you saying that 10 doesn't do that? You don't offer lower rates for equivalent content on the multi-channels than you do on your main channel?
We would do that, but if you're talking about bidding down,
paying less.
Drive the cost,
Paying less for it. Channel 10 doesn't do that? You pay the same amount across no matter which channel you're broadcasting the piece on?
No, that's not the case, but I think, I took the line of questioning to relate to, is there some sort of overlay where we drive the price down because the audiences are less on those? We pay what is an appropriate market level for all of our content and where we place it.
Yeah, but I think you might have answered my question with another question. The appropriate market level is set by an agreed price between a buyer and a seller, right? Is it the case that you pay less for an equivalent piece of content on a channel with a smaller audience share than on your main channel?
That is correct.
It is?
Yeah.
So that is occurring?
Well, I think in the context of, normal business, yes.
Yeah.
I think, though, if you're talking specifically about Australian drama, it is very unusual to put drama on a digital channel. It would be unusual given the price, the cost of making those programs. And at the moment, in Network 10's case, it's drama that is really our strength. And it is drama where we've had most success over the last year with programs like Offspring, Underground, the Julian Assange telemovie. We've got more drama on air this year. I know many of you may not have liked that program. We've got more drama on this year than ever before, with over 190 hours of first-run Australian drama on Network 10 this year.
Okay, thank you. Now, your news and current affairs activities are directly regulated by a government-appointed public servant regulator via a code that same regulator approves, licence conditions imposed by law, and ACMA can pull your channel off air if you breach those regulations. You don't. I should just check this. Do you currently have print assets in your stable?
No.
No. Okay. So, do you have a particular view about some of the contentions that have been made around the existence of new regulation around press councils?
No.
Won't express a view, that's fine. Do you have a view on the proposed introduction of a public interest test to assess the public interest of given takeover and merger proposals?
Well, I think our issue has always been, as we've said today, if there is a further reduction in the diversity of the media landscape in Australia, that is a concern. And I think that, as we said before, the sharp end of this is regional Australia.
Truly.
And as it pertains to news, which again is a really critical part of this, we think that it'll be compromised.
Okay. Well, that's a very useful point of view. I presume you're meaning that in the context of lifting of the reach rule. I know you've got concerns about that. And while we may argue amongst us about the specific form of drafting, do you think a properly crafted public interest test is one hedge against that consolidation that you are clearly concerned about?
Well, as we said at the outset, that we think that it's unnecessary.
But no, I didn't hear that. I heard you say you are worried about collapsing diversity and you want the retention of the reach rule for that reason. Does it not necessarily also follow then that the government proposes to introduce a test to prevent further consolidation? You'd at least be interested in looking
we
at
don't want further consolidation.
And this is one measure for preventing that.
Correct.
Okay.
I think it's important, though, that, our position has not been don't ever remove the reach rule. It's been look at everything as a package.
Yeah.
And that includes looking at the measures that protect diversity. And, whilst we've always said that introducing a public interest test of whatever form is always going to be very difficult because you will always have issues about certainty and subjectivity. And looking at the legislation that we've been presented with on Thursday morning last week, our concerns about subjectivity and uncertainty were not addressed. And, happy to have a discussion about it, but we don't think that these bills do the job.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.